I went against it because I wanted to prove it wrong, and it kicked my ass. And I did that my whole life. And then I started listening to it, and then one day I had this like compulsion. I need to go to the Amazon, taken somebody's brain, live human beings, right? And they've had to cut out part of their brains, whether it was for tumors and so on. But what they realized was actually no cognition, no memory was lost. When the doctors can't really do anything, they were like, well, there's a chapel down, down there, you should get together with your family and start to pray. Why? Because there is something beyond us. Welcome to the Martial Mind Power podcast. Today in the studio, we have my co-host, Jatinder Palahar, aka JT Jedi, and myself, Sifu Lakloy, founder of Martial Mind Power. And today we are going to talk about an interesting topic, which in traditional fashion, JT is going to pick. So, JT, you want to do the honors today?
Yes, Sifu Lax, we will. And we're going back to the amazing biblical book. Right? And we'll pick a random page and see where it comes up with. Okay, so we have eye sparkle.
So what we decided to do in these podcasts is we're going to talk about all topics around self-mastery and self-realization inspired by martial arts and martial arts philosophy. And today's one is eye sparkle. So that is, there we go. Eye sparkle. It's an eye with the cosmos in it. Okay. So I'm going to read directly from it, and then we'll take the conversation whichever way the universe wants to steer us today. All right. So the spiritual eye, often referred to as the third eye, is a projection from your spiritual center seen at the space between your eyebrows when meditating. All right. So that's this space right here. Okay. It reflects a deep meditative energy of the immaterial world into your two physical eyes for you to see, a reflection of your spiritual center. The union of your two physical eyes into the single spiritual eye raises your consciousness away from materiality towards a higher state of being. Often, the spiritual eye will appear as a golden ring containing a sphere of dark purple and blue light, and a bright white star, the doorway to cosmic consciousness. It is literally a sparkle in your eye. So, we've jumped right into it this time, isn't it?
Wow. So it looks like what we're going to be talking about is the third eye, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm going to let you start today.
Talk about the third eye.
Let's talk about the third eye.
Okay.
The spiritual eye.
All right. So for my understanding of what it is basically supposed to be apparently your pineal gland, which is centered around here, which when they've done studies on it, scientists have done studies on it, it looks like the retina of the eye, but inwards, right? So that's what the science apparently is saying on it. Don't quote me on it, but that's what I've heard about it, right? And the idea is to meditate and get into such a state where when you've got your eyes closed, that eye opens up, right? And they say that when your third eye opens up, it basically connects with the all eye, the all-seeing eye, which is the universe essence, basically, and through which, if you're able to sustain it, able to literally connect with the cosmos and even time and space apparently as well. So that's the kind of gist of the basis of my understanding on it.
That's right. No, that's right. You're absolutely spot on. The actual pineal gland it just doesn't sit at the front of the just behind the skin and the skull and the forehead. It's a little bit further back in, and I believe it's kind of like the size of an almond or thereabouts. So from my own personal spiritual experience is the third eye is. And when you meditate, first and foremost, it's the area that you should focus on. So quite often when you first get into things like mindfulness, in particular, you start then going deeper into meditation, most people are not really aware of where to look when you meditate. So what happens is, and this is very common, especially for the beginner, is as you meditate, you feel relaxed and you fall asleep. All right. So that's very common. But the problem with falling asleep when you meditate is you miss a point. Okay, you need to stay awake, but not in a complete waking state. You're in a different way of being. Okay, so you're not in sleep state. You're on a different wavelength, and I think
like borderline, isn't it? It's like almost that state between awake and falling asleep.
Yeah,
like that middle line there.
If I remember correctly, I think it's you're in the delta state. If I remember correctly. So you want to be in that state, and the key thing is there is an awareness of what's going on. When you fall asleep, then you lose that awareness, okay? And therefore you're also not even unconsciously registering what's going on, okay? So you want to stay in that delta state, and when you're in that state, you refrain from sleeping. So when you do fall asleep, your eyes may kind of become drowsy and start drifting downwards, okay? And you're with your neck and your body and everything else. Or if you're leaning against something, you'll just kind of fall asleep against that. So it's important that you keep your focus on the third eye. Okay, it's also referred to as the Christ Kutashta, right? In some religious practice like Kriya Yoga, for instance. So the idea is to focus there. Now, when you focus there, there's throughout all the work that you do when you're in going into a meditative state, throughout the relaxation work, throughout the breath work, and any other meditation aspect that is involved in whatever meditation you're doing, stay focused there. Now, if you're going into a spiritual type of meditation, because some meditations are guided meditations, and it could be around things like confidence and abundance and things like that. Okay, they're slightly different. There's something going on there on an unconscious level, not necessarily on a spiritual level. Okay, although they part and parcel of the same thing, the spiritual space is beyond that. Okay, although the unconscious mind is part of it, is beyond that. So when you start tapping into your spiritual aspect, your spiritual body and your spiritual connection, then if you focus in this point, the idea is you will start to see a halo. Okay, it will look like a nebulae, right, so to speak. Okay, so there might be like a ring, right, and that ring looks like your eye. Will have a surround of bluey purpley light. Okay, and in between there it will be blue, right, to start off, and then the higher you get and the higher the state of meditation you ascend into, you'll kind of reach different levels of visibility through that spiritual eye, and also the kind of the messages you receive, the visions you see, the sounds you hear, the smells you smell, the taste you'll be able to taste. All of those sensory experiences start coming to you. On top of that, the thoughts that you'll also experience. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions about meditation is that your mind must be completely empty. But actually, you have to get to a point where there's no noise. So you switch the noise off. And then what happens is you'll get messages, but they'll appear to you in various ways. And one of those ways is thought. And they'll just hit you. And you'll be like, I didn't think that. Or did I think that? Maybe I did think that. Maybe I made it up. And there's a lot of self-doubt that happens. So when you do meditate, one of the key things to be mindful of is that any thoughts you get, you just accept them without doubting them, without questioning them, and have like an absolute surrender to what you're receiving, because they're messages coming to you from outside of you.
Lex, before we go deeper into this, I just wanted to tap on the element of the mind, body, and spirit. It's something you mentioned earlier on, saying that when you're meditating, there's the element of almost the body element of things that are going on within yourself, subconscious, in your brain, in your mind. And then when you transcend that, then you got the spiritual element, which is what you're about to basically allude to and go into, right? If we go back a bit into the body element of it, about meditation and how meditating can actually help you address issues you're having in your material body, in your surroundings and stuff like that. And then we'll go into the spiritual side of it, just in case we stretch it a bit too far for people to go.
No, absolutely. I think this is one of those podcasts where, to be honest with you, it's taken us years to get to this point where we decided we're just going to talk about it. It being spirituality, it being high state of consciousness, it being God, it being one consciousness, it being this subtle energy, this life force, whatever you want to call it, right? But it's taken us up to now to get to this point where we're like, okay, right now we're embodiment of the experience. We can talk about it because we're now qualified, because we've been there, done that, and understand it. So we've started to talk about, that's what this podcast is about. So, I've got no reservations about literally jumping into that conversation. But everybody's at a different level, and that's okay. And it's okay not to really have an awareness around your spiritual body and what that might be. I think the best way to kind of like acknowledge that there is something there is where, if you've ever seen somebody die, whether it's in hospital or, whatever scenario it could be, is, that there's this body that's just left. They're almost like they say, your clothes that you wear in this lifetime are remaining there, but something's gone. That person no longer exists. What's gone? There, there's something, but it's not there anymore. And that is spirit. And I always say as well, it's funny how all hospitals, or most hospitals, have chapels in them. And when the doctors can't really do anything, they'll be like, well, there's a chapel down there, you should get together with your family and start to pray. Why? Because there is something beyond us that is bigger than us. And doctors see miracles all the time and they can't explain it. Okay. And they've, obviously gone through this whole, medical school and all the academic process to get to where they are, and they still don't understand it, right? And that's okay, because it's too much to understand. It's far beyond our cognition, right? I quite often say, there's the number one is the known, the things that you already know because you learnt them somewhere. There's the unknown. These are things that you don't know yet, but you can learn. Okay. And then there's the knowable. These are the things that you'll never know, you'll never comprehend, and they're just above and beyond our comprehension. Okay. Well, especially within this physical existence. So there's kind of like, almost kind of like a segue into, there is a spirit, but we may loosely identify with it. But then if we prepare it back a little bit for those people that quite not there yet, and that's okay, right? Because I wasn't there for most part of my life, and until I had to go through my own process, and that is that of the body and the mind, which is where most people live. Most people just live in the body, the physicality and the materiality around that. Why? Because we live in a physical existence, and the physical experiences, the sensory experiences that we get in this lifetime are amazing. Let's face it, right? We all have our favorite food or favorite foods that we enjoy. We all have, most of us have, our favorite type of music, or our favorite song that we like to listen to, our favorite clothes, and our favorite, clothes brand or designer or whatever it might be, and so on, right? In other words, we live for the sensory gratification, and then there are others that actually do kind of progress into the mind, and that is the cognition aspect of it, it might even be up to the point where, there's thoughts that serve us and there's thoughts that don't serve us, and how do you kind of, move from there and then work and then you can start looking at, well, how can I develop from there? And that's the whole self-help personal development space. And that can happen in many ways, shapes and forms, right? You could do it through music, you could do it through dance, you could do it through martial arts, you could do it through personal development practices, and there's so many different modalities and tool sets you can use. But the key thing here is that everything that ever happens, it happens inside us, right? The food that we eat, right, and that we taste, that sensation is actually happening inside us, right? It's not happening outside of us or anywhere else. It's happening inside of us. The moment we put that food in our mouth, right, and our saliva starts to break it down and absorb the different tastes, the different parts of the tongue, those messages are sent to the brain, and our brain is cognizing and creating this whole image of what that sensation of eating a specific type of food is going to be like. So if you picture your favorite food, that taste is happening in your mind, or should I say in your brain, right? If you go out somewhere, let's say you're sightseeing and you see something amazing, that experience is not happening outside of you, it's happening inside of you, because all of that visual field is hitting your retina, being translated into those messages are sent to your brain. They're being translated into some messages which are being translated into something that you can understand. So it could be like a mountain range, and you look at this, but that's all happening in here. What's in your mind is not what's out there. Okay, as I say, the map is not the territory, right? So what's happening inside is not what's outside, right? And also, there's your own bias as well, right? Mm-hmm. So you might also be putting a bias on you, but like, I love mountains, in which case what's happening in here is going to be greater than what's out there potentially. Or I hate mountains, when what's happening in here is less than what's out there, for instance, right? So your mind, everything within every experience you're having is happening inside of you. Even sound, you might hear, somebody might say something to you, and my wife says this all the time, right? She said something to me, but either I didn't hear it, right, or I heard something totally different, right? It's not that I did it on purpose, but it's the fact that, and I'm partially a little bit deaf on that one there, but it's partly to do with the fact that it's the way your mind translates things, and your unconscious mind will delete the things that it doesn't want to hear. Right, it will generalize the things that it does want to hear, and it will store the things that it doesn't want to hear for a time when you've got more resources to deal with it till a later date. Okay, so what people are saying is not necessarily what they mean. You put your own meaning onto their words when those messages, the vibrating air particles hit your cochlea. They start to send signals up to your brain, and your brain starts translating that into something that you're trying to make sense out of, right? Or make sense to you.
It's so interesting that, like how we grow up, we get it's like a two-way thing, in the sense that we grow up, we get these experiences, but then we make the meaning of the experience, right? And then it just leads forward into our life. It's like you said, where is your experience coming from? It's then coming from your brain, which is, bringing everything you've learned and whatnot, putting it together, and then just creating a concept or an idea which you can understand and make meaning of. And then that's what you're moving forward with. And then you can potentially be using that to project thoughts, project your beliefs and views onto whatever's happening in front of you. So it's very fascinating how the brain is able to actually do that, right?
Absolutely. So, everything physical is happening inside us, and it's happening inside us, not in a physical sense, but in a mental sense. In a mental sense, it's nothing that you can kind of pin down. Okay. It's energy moving around, electrical impulses, but how can you say an electrical impulse means a certain thing? Mm-hmm. There's something far greater that's kind of creating that image, of things that you're seeing, the taste of what you're eating, the sounds of what you're hearing, and the message within that, more importantly, and so on. So everything that ever happens is happening inside us. It's happening in our minds. Now we're going on to the mind, right? The key thing about the mind is the mind the mind is, I believe, it's a gateway between your spirit and your body. Okay, and if you believe that you're not well, okay, and if you've been as a kid, you didn't want to go to school one day, you just didn't want to go, or somebody's bullying you, and you say you're sick, by the end of that day, you're going to start feeling a little bit sick. Okay, why? Because your mind is starting to project illness into your body. Okay, so what your mind, Dr. Nepali Health Family said, what your mind can conceive and believe it can achieve. You can literally create illness. I was talking to my cousin earlier, and I was talking about how the unconscious mind is so suggestive that sometimes you may unconsciously suggest something to yourself as a temporary strategy to deal with a difficulty that you're experiencing at a certain point in time. And it could be, you don't want to go to work because you're ill, right? And use that as an excuse not to go to work, right? I'm not, and what will happen over time, if you constantly repeat that, you'll get ill. Right? Why? Because your mind will start creating illness in your body, right?
It's like a habit, right? It becomes like a habit.
Oh, absolutely. And when you start doing it unconsciously, it's what's called autosuggestion, right? So you're suggesting these things. And I don't suggest anybody, start auto-suggesting and creating any kind of illness in their body, because you will create it. So I will ask you to auto-suggest something that's conducive, something that's resourceful for you. Okay, so if you have got an illness, then rather than that, just say, I am well and healthy, and any illness is clearing up, and it will be gone. And set yourself a target, a realistic target, or even be optimistic and be a little bit hopeful about when you're going to get better. And the chances are you probably will. And I tell you, there's actual scientific proof around this. And this is the scientific proof around placebos, right? There's so much proof around placebos that, placebos, if you're not sure what a placebo is, this is when, somebody that's sick goes to a doctor, and a doctor will, what doctors have done in these placebo studies is they have given people with the same symptoms, right? They've given half the group actual medication to heal that symptom or to reduce that symptom. And they've given the other half what they call a sugar pill, a placebo. It's just sugar, right? And it's not going to have any healing effect on them whatsoever. But what they found is actually the placebo has the same, if not a greater effect of healing the people with the same illness than the one with the actual pill, right? So what does that show? That shows actually your mind actually is creating a lot of what's happening, right? And I always say this is, I strongly encourage all listeners, all viewers to go and do your own research, find this information. In my book, Master Your Life, there's a huge section on this, which talks about this and has some references in there as well. But, you just Google it. There's just so much information on placebo research studies and so on that you'll start to realize actually the power of our mind. So then we go on to the next step, right? Is if everything's happening in our body and our mind can create things, then what's the real deal here? Well, the real deal is everything you think, everything you say, everything you do starts in the mind. Okay, absolutely, all of that starts in the mind. All right, you cannot do any of that without it happening. It's not in your brain. Your brain is an organ that allows you to access that aspect of yourself. The mind is
the neck-top computer, right?
Hey?
As it was once suggested, the neck-top computer.
Exactly.
It processes the information for understanding.
Exactly. It's a cosmic computer. It's a cosmic computer. It's there is still no scientific evidence that I know of, and correct me if I'm wrong and anybody's found this, but to my best of my understanding right now, there's no scientific evidence that proves our brain stores memories. Right. And we talked about this in the last podcast, which is cosmic storage, right? There is no evidence whatsoever. Now, if there is, then I'd please let us know, write in the comments, and we'll check that out. And, and we'll thank you, humbly for educating us. But to the best of my knowledge, I don't think there's anybody that's discovered where our brains store information. What they do know is parts of the brains become active and light up under MRI scans when we perform certain functions. But that's not storage. And just because those areas light up doesn't mean that's where that memory is stored. We don't know where memory is stored. Nobody can actually say this is your hard drive for this person, right? And if we cut this bit out, it'll go. In fact, there's a wonderful book by Holographic Universe, it's called. And Holographic Universe, you know what? I'm going to Google this for you guys. So I can give you the author on this.
Yeah, while you're looking for that, it was just interesting because you brought up that thing about the memory. I mean, there's science, there's records that suggest that when transplants have happened, when they've moved body parts over to somebody else, that person started to show certain things or remembered things or started doing things in a particular way, right? So it brings a question up as to, was that memory embedded within the cells for it to happen? And it's quite interesting that you say that.
That's right. So is apt that you just said that, because this book called Holographic Universe is by this gentleman called Michael Talbot, and he's actually got actual references to real life events that have happened and real life studies that have happened. And what they've in some of these studies, what they've done is they've taken somebody's brain, live human beings, right, and they've had to cut out part of their brains, whether it was for tumors and so on. But what they realized was actually no cognition, no memory was lost. Okay. There's been instances where the brains have had to be cut down to a half or a quarter, and they've found that actually they've managed to retain full function, full memory, and everything's back, just as normal. And on that, there's kind of this theory, which is the holographic universe, is that a hologram. Imagine it, a hologram's like one of these old negatives for a photo, right? So imagine a negative, right? And if you cut it in half, you can create the whole photo from half of the negative. If you cut that negative into a quarter, you can create the whole photo from a quarter of that negative. You cut it into an eighth, you can create the whole photo from an eighth of that negative. The point is, no matter how small you break it down to, you can create the whole. And therefore, we are holographic beings in that sense. So, there's something far greater going on up in our mind and our mind's eye. And the mind's eye actually is my kind of segue into the third eye now, because the third eye is now taking us into the actual ability to be able to connect and see with that ethereal space, the Akash, as it's also referred to, right, through the third eye, right, which is connecting the ether to our body, our physical selves, right? And we can have all of that experience within ourselves. We are both the spiritual experience, the mental experience, and the physical experience all happening within us all at the same time. But if you want to stop for a moment and think, all right, so how can I really get a lens on this? Well, actually, this is your lens. It literally is your lens. All right, and you can see into that. So that's how that kind of you bridge the two sides from the physical to the spiritual elements of yourself, and the third eye kind of really comes into play.
Yeah, it's fascinating how in the beginning we were talking about the mind, body, and spirit, and the body is physical. It's like this is what you can touch, it's real, right? And then the spiritual element sometimes is something you can't really touch, it's just there, out there somewhere. But then the mind is something in between, which allows you to experience your body, but also to have these spiritual experiences as well, right? Like talking about spiritual experiences, because I know you had a funky experience once. Is that something you want to share in regards to
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been on a shamanic journey. In fact, I've been on a spiritual quest for I'd say 18 years, or just shy thereof. And it's not something that I chose. It was something that I was pushed into. I'm a firm believer that, you know, life's going to give you the lessons you need to discover who you really are, right? You're what I call the original truth. My third book is called Original Truth because of that reason. And the original truth being, what is your spiritual essence? You know, what are you put on this planet to do, and what is your spiritual essence? How is that going to shine it out into this world? I got pushed into it, and I got pushed into it hard, right? And so through my kind of process of suffering, first thing I turned to was meditations. My uncle used to go to meditations, and he used to follow a guru based in India, amazing spiritual being and physical being, and a live guru as well. I used to go to this guy, and he used to take me along, and I started kind of going through this process of releasing everything that I had going on inside me, and it brought me slowly, kind of allowed me to kind of build up my mental faculties, build up my spiritual faculties. My body was strong. I used to train regularly and so on. But when I started going through that traumatic experience in my life, I started getting psoriasis, and initially I got shingles as well. I've never had shingles or anything like that, and it started showing up on the body as illness, and then through that spiritual process started slowly healing, and I started then to take kind of more of interest in that area, because it started making me feel better, started to give me clarity. All the mud in my mind started to settle, and I started to see clearly. And when you start to see clearly, you can start to act more resourcefully, right? Well, especially when you go from masterlessness, and then you cultivate your mastery. It's a long process, and a process that you need perseverance and practice, right? And you just got to keep going. And if you kind of have a momentary setback, as in you don't really put your best side forwards, you need to remind yourself, okay, I didn't quite get it right there. What can I learn from it, and how can I move on from here? All right. That's how I kind of got interested in that side of things. And then over the years, I just started to kind of become more tuned on, my inner feeling, my inner sense of being, and I started to kind of become maybe a little bit more intuitive. And even though I acted against my intuition, to my dismay, I started getting a lot of those moments where I was like, oh, you know what? I knew that, I felt that, I heard that, I sensed that inside me, but I went against it because I wanted to prove it wrong, and it kicked my ass. And I did that my whole life. And then I started listening to it. And then one day I had this compulsion. I need to go to the Amazon. And I did. And I went to the Amazon, and I spent 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks, with indigenous shamans in Amazon, and a shaman that was trained by an indigenous shaman that lives in the UK here. He was a very close friend of mine. And we went out there, and we ended up going through a shamanic experience. And that really kind of opened everything up to the cosmos. And that was really my insight into the other side, and the world of spirit. And it was through that experience that I really got the insights that I needed at that time, and really the answers to the cosmos. And it's from that experience that really, once you're enlightenment is seeing and having all of the answers laid out in front of you, right? But then after you have light shed on all of that, then you have the obligation of going away and practicing it. Okay, the work starts. That's not where it ends. Okay, and then once you start doing the work and you start getting better at it, and you can start acting more graciously through the divine work and the divine messages and divine spirit and so on, then you can start to share it with people. Okay, and especially if once you come back from experience like that, and you start to meditate and you sit in that space consistently to the point that you'll be in that space all the time, you then can serve others and help them on their journeys as a consequence of that. So coming back to the spiritual eye, as I saw it, is exactly that. It's not just an eye to see, but it's also an eye from which you transmit. Now, if you look at the Egyptian spiritual eye, the way it's always drawn. And if I was to place it this way, where the eye is facing forwards this side, right, there's always a little leg that comes down and there's a bit that comes out to the back. Okay. Now they are kind of, if you do a cutout of the brain through the pineal gland, it does look like that, but actually energetically there is a line of energy that flows straight down. Okay. And that earths you. Okay. It earths you and it sends energy out into the ether. But then you've also got the line that goes out. Now that's when that energy comes out from the back of your head, right? And this is for people that meditate consistency. You'll feel a whirring at the back. Now what's happening is you're sending energy out into the universe through the back of your head. Okay, through the back bottom part of your brain. Okay. Now that part of the brain is where you'll feel like somebody's kind of like just gently blowing at the back of your head there, and you'll feel like a whirring kind of a sensation. Now you're transmitting and you're pointing whatever your messages are into the universe through that space. All right, but that's all happening through that third eye, and then the front part of it is what you see. Okay, so you've got your reception, right? Your receptiveness here, right? You've got your transmission at the back, and you got your earthing at the bottom, and that's how I felt it, and that's how I see it. And when you do practice, just allow yourself to make sure that you do sit, in an upright position. Right, when you meditate, and that your spine is straight, because that's going to help you kind of develop the energy, build up the energy through your kundalini, right, or what you call the serpent energy. You'll feel a whirring of energy coming up your spine, and it'll come up into the base of the spine, up into your pineal gland, and you'll feel it here. Sometimes it feels like someone's pressing their thumb against your forehead. All right, and if that's happening, or you'll feel a little whirring there, or you'll feel a little sensation there, then what's happening is waking up. Okay, it's waking up, always warming up, as you might say. So that's kind of like how that your third eye you're activating it. All right.
No, that's fascinating. Like, thanks for sharing that, because it's fascinating. I always find it interesting when we could talk about things, but when somebody's had an experience of something, you can't really argue that experience, because the experience is their own. It's something they've gone through and exactly that experienced, right? So and everybody, as we know, will experience things in different ways, but when somebody shares it, to share that this is what's happened, this is how I went through, or this is what happened with me, you can't really argue with that, right? It's their truth, right? It's their experience and how that's come about. So thank you for sharing that, because I'm sure there's people who will resonate with that, and there's probably going to be lots of questions people have in regards to meditation and the experience of things and things like that. So I think we'll save that for another talk. Lex, is there any last few words that you want to share before we close off today's session?
I think the key thing is that theory is one thing, but the key thing is to practice it, to stay and maintain that connectivity and the receptivity all the time. So for me, the key thing is, when I meditate, is to get back into that zone. All right, it's really important. But moreover, don't get into a state of expectation, but allow yourself to surrender to that moment, because your next experience might be a progression. Okay, you might move on from there, and you don't know what that's going to look like. So if you expect the same thing and you create the same thing, then you're not going to move on. All right, so it's really important that you allow yourself to surrender to what comes to you, be open and receptive all the time, and let the messages come to you. Half of the thoughts that you think a day are psychic thoughts. Psychic thoughts means that that's your subtle body and thoughts that are being sent to you through energies and intelligence around you, outside of you, that is not you. Okay, but you are part of and swimming inside of. All right, so just be mindful of that, that you don't become so rigid and fixated in thinking a certain thing, creating a certain outcome, because you're not going to move. You have to remain fluid. You have to remain open. Okay, like an empty teacup, an empty teacup, the air is just flowing through that cup as and when it feels free to do so. And you've just got to kind of be like that. An empty teacup is always full of air and ether. Okay, it's not empty at all, and you should just got to be like that, no empty vessel. Another way to think of it is to be like a water pipe. All right, the water pipe has to be empty in order for water to flow through it. But if it's clogged up and it's got water in it, no more water can flow through it. In fact, the water becomes stagnant, stale, and dies. All right, so just stay open, just be a vessel, and allow everything that comes to you to come to you. And just last words. Notice what you notice, right? Just notice what you notice. Just like you see with your eyes, you notice what you notice. You see what you want to see. With the third eye, notice what you notice. Don't see what you want to see, okay? Because then you'll limit yourself, all right?
Wow, there you go, folks. And just in case you're wondering how to decipher all that, get the books. Get the books. They're available on Amazon. They're available on the martianmindpower.com. Click through to the site and have a read. And if you've got any questions, by all means, put them through. It's easy to contact Lax, leave comments as well, and we'll come back to you with anything we can help you with. So on that note, thank you, Lax, and thank you, everyone, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, JT.